A city. Anybody know what city that's a picture of? Anybody want to guess? We're studying the book of Exodus. Got a correct guess over here. That's Cairo. The United States is pretty young. Relative to Cairo, Europe is pretty young. The pyramids existed, it's estimated, more than 1,000 years before the Exodus story began. So, yeah, that's what I said when I learned that. I said, 1,000 years before the Exodus story. I always assumed the Hebrews built the pyramids, but not so. What's that? That's right. Okay. Let's do a brief review, very brief, since I was a little late. We talked about, in our first class, we looked at what it was like to live in Egypt when Joseph came. We talked about some of those conditions, and then we talked about how my screen went blank and hoped that it didn't happen again. We talked about how there's this unusual emphasis in the Exodus narrative on the firstborn, right? From the name of the celebration Passover to the scriptures that are put in the Tefillin that Jews even today wear and emphasize. We played the Exodus game. We were supposed to play 3 rounds, but I guess you guys only got to play 2 because I was absent, and didn't happen that way. We played as God on the left, Pharaoh in round 2, and Moses with or without horns in round 3. We did that in an effort to generate some questions about the narrative that sometimes we overlook, that I have overlooked. I came up with 15 or 16 questions. I think I put those listed all of those questions a couple of weeks ago. And then we talked about the story and how it really is a good story in that it jumps right into the action, and it develops characters, and you get Moses there and God there and Pharaoh there. You've got the people in the background. You kind of know who they are. Moses is reluctant to go. He eventually agrees. He goes up to Pharaoh and he says, "Let my people go," is God's order. And Pharaoh says no, punishes the slaves. They rebel against Moses. And then we have this strange conversation between God and Moses. And God says, "Hey, I've got a new name I want to tell you about." And we spent some time last week talking about God's new name, and talking about how it was unpronounceable, how it really wasn't well translated or understood as eternal. That's a limited understanding of Jehovah, because eternal suggests that you always exist on the timeline, but actually God is outside of time, and it's really unclear, and we don't really like it. And what we've done is we've every time that name, if you will, appears in the scripture, we have replaced it with a title. And the title is Lord. It shows up in lowercase, in uppercase text whenever it's printed. But in fact, it is communicating an identity that suggests God is, always has been, always will be, and that He is the creator. And that leads us to today's topic and last week's assignment, which was monotheism. This is the introduction of monotheism into the human conscience. And I asked you to think about the difference between It's feeling a little sketchy there. We could do this without the slides, but it wouldn't be as fun. I'm going to stand back. I asked you the difference between monotheistic religion and polytheistic religion, and I asked you not to jump to the definitions. And that's where we're going to pick up today, talking about monotheism and polytheism. And I don't want to answer, we're going to answer the question or the assignment at the end of our lesson today. So if we get into the definitions, which is exactly what I asked you not to do, right? We get into this idea of one God, many gods. And for me, that definition, I just assume when I hear those words, I know what that means. And the definitions actually distract me from really thinking about this profound concept of monotheistic worship versus polytheistic worship. And it's really, the definitions make me think about the numbers, right? If someone comes to you and say, tell me what the difference between monotheism and polytheism is, it's really about the numbers. But the difference between religiously, it's a qualitative difference. And I think in order for us to understand that, we're going to have to get a little bit of background. So let's put ourselves in ancient Egypt and talk about this polytheistic idea within that culture. So I have shortened Egyptian polytheism so I didn't have to type it as much as EP, right? And it's based on the not so subtle foundation of fear. Polytheism is based on fear, and the reason for that is because when you believe there are multiple gods, they all have their own power, but there's a lot of them. And they all work together somewhere in the heavens, and we'll call them Elohim, which means, remember that word? Power. It's just a power, right? Laban said to Jacob when he ran away, I have the power, the Elohim, to destroy you. And you took my daughters without saying goodbye. It's just a power. It's just something we don't understand that has control. Well, and it's plural, by the way. These Elohim have control of everything. They're oftentimes in conflict with one another. And when they are in conflict, we know that's true because, as an Egyptian, the weather patterns, the disasters that occur, the damage that happens to us, the loss of health, it's all because of these conflicts that are going on in the heavenly realms. And by the way, humans are of little concern, and the outcomes from these conflicts don't matter as far as humans are concerned. And these Elohim, they are, did I put it up there? Maybe on the next slide. The outcomes from these conflicts are not in the best interest of humans. And if left to themselves, they will bring chaos to the world. Now, this ties into the Egyptian creation story. And it starts very similar to the Christian, Judeo-Christian creation story, which is that the space is filled with chaos, right? And the chaos in the Egyptian story comes from these heavenly creatures that are in conflict with one another. And Pharaoh is in fact a deity in this story, and his role is to be the human intercessor, the human liaison. And I think there's been a lot of effort, just as a little sidetrack, in my preparations. There's been a lot of people who have wanted to know which Pharaoh was in charge when Moses came. And it's confounding. And I believe that's deliberate. I believe it's actually divine. Because the concept of Pharaoh is what we're dealing with. It's a concept. Any Pharaoh that sat in the throne was, in fact, a deity that was to liaison between those deities in heaven and humanity. And Pharaoh's job was to keep the celestial peace, to keep the chaos out of the world. And this was their paradigm, right? This was their rubric. And he was elevated to the status of God. What else did I put up there? The other thing about these Elohim is everyone has their own unique power, but none of them are all-powerful. None of them are, in fact, without some need or vulnerability. And we see this in the cartoons, we see this in the Greek mythology, we see this in Roman mythology, right? You have all these different gods and demigods and these stories, and they have vulnerabilities. And one of them is attention. They like to have attention. And it's the ego. And so, as a consequence, it's necessary to build temples and to offer sacrifices to get the attention of the right God. So if you move into a place, you ask yourself, who are the gods that really matter around here? Right? If I'm in Egypt, well, the sun god is really important, right? Because if the sun is angry with me, I will never be able to grow anything, right? And the god of the Nile, which sustains life, is really important. I'm probably not that interested in the god of ice, right? Not in Egypt. I mean, I have to put it in the, I want to call it the pantheon, but I think that's the wrong word. But I put it in, and it's believed that, the scholars believe that there were hundreds of gods that were recognized by the Egyptians. And so when Moses came to Pharaoh and said, Jehovah has said, he called the Egyptian priests and said, can you check the books? Sorry, no Jehovah there. Don't know who that is. And also, this idea of sacrifices, and temples, they were built to appease and look for blessings from these Elohim, right? Sounds, like pretty basic understanding of polytheism. You probably didn't need me to put all that up there on the screen, but it's important. In some, there's hundreds of these gods. Each Elohim has its own unique power. They're often in conflict with one another. The Pharaoh is an Elohim that protects the Egyptian people and keeps divine peace. The temples were built and sacrifices were made for blessings and protection from disaster. Now, before we go on, just a quick question. How many of you have had the opportunity, the privilege to visit Egypt? No one. Oh, I'm sorry. You're here, you made it. One person. I want to tell you, this is on my bucket list, and I don't have very many things on my bucket list. This may be the only thing on my bucket list. I really want to go to Egypt. And really, I touched the table. Back on, okay. I want you to we don't really have a full understanding of this. And I loved this quote. This is where Egypt is where mythology meets reality. These temples are extraordinary. I mean, look at the size of those statues. Do you know who this is? Want to guess? What? Pharaoh, right? That's Pharaoh. Do you know this is a column and there's another equal, it's a colonnade. And they've got these statues. Do you know what that statue represents, anybody? One of the gods, the most important one. In Egypt, which is the most important god? Ra. Amun-Ra, the sun god, right? And do you see what is, and Amun-Ra was represented by the ram. Do you know what animal was killed for the Passover? A baby lamb. It was an affront. It was a serious insult. You see the statue under the chin of Amun-Ra there? Do you know who that is? Pharaoh. There's a whole long colonnade that you walked up to the temple that on either side were these gigantic statues. Statue after statue after statue of Ra with Pharaoh under his chin. Look at the size of these columns. It's extraordinary. Now, these two, the one on the right and the one on the left on top, this is a rendering of what they thought it would look like because they were painted, right? They were in living color. I put this up here because this was the culture for 1,000 years. For 5 times as long as the United States has existed. This was the culture. Okay? And they believed that this was what existed outside of the human world. Right? So let me give you an analogy to sort of illustrate this. Imagine that there's a family or a house in which there are children and there are adults living. And the children don't know, for whatever reason, that the grown-ups in the house are their parents. All they know is that for some unexplained reason, the grown-ups have all the power and all the control. They control the food, the pizza, the chicken tenders, they control the games, the candy, and when they grow up and get older, they control the internet access, they control keys to the car, and all screen time. And the children view this through a rubric of power. It's a power play. Who has the power in these interactions? And so they navigate, as you might expect, through negotiation and through manipulation. Okay, so this is the first question that I wanted to ask. If you watched for a few days, what would you think? And I got beat to the punchline. I realized when I wrote this that someone would say, sounds like an average American household. So I changed the question to, what if you watched this for a few years? What would be your impressions? What would you say about that situation? Not rhetorical. Questions in yellow. A line of succession. Explain.
The children are going to manipulate, and to the point where they're going to have power.
Okay. They're looking to gain power themselves. eventually. Okay? Great observation. She said she would feel sorry for the parents.
I also feel sorry for the kids, though, right? Like, it stinks being controlled and denied cookies and internet access, but if you have that relationship and you know it's for a greater good, then you would think eventually they would see that's the case.
Right. I mean, this a phrase that we have used in our household in this situation to our children is, we are on your side. We're on your team. That's inherent in the idea of parents with children, right? And so just keep this analogy in your mind. Let's shift gears for a second, because we have to talk about monotheism within the context of this culture. And just this morning, I changed the background of this slide because I wanted you to keep in your head what it was like to live in Egypt at these times with these temples. And these are multiple temples, Karnak and Luxor. So monotheism coming out of Judaism. There's only one Elohim. There's only one God. That God is the creator of everything, including humanity. There is, in fact, chaos in the world, but it's not because of warring Elohim that don't care about humanity, but it's because of sin, right? It's because of missing the mark. And this Elohim has no needs or vulnerabilities that can be leveraged, right? And so you can't influence or manipulate or negotiate with this God. And so sacrifices aren't made to appease the God or to get protection. It's not how it works in this system. So now let me ask you another question. I can't remember which question I put first. I got two. How would you respond today if someone told you that Egyptian polytheism was absolutely true and you needed to go and make some sacrifices to Amun-Ra? What would you say? I got one no. That's it? Just no? No thanks? Okay. Little courtesy and politeness there. Why no?
Well, the answer used to be yes, because you wouldn't get in the VIP line in a city unless you sacrificed their God. So by not doing that, it made the Hebrews like this outcast group because they weren't, paying the fee to get in the club, and that made them ostracized.
Okay. I mean, but today, why would you say no?
They're wrong.
Because they're wrong. Okay. Does anybody know what? If you ever see these little words in the corner of my slide, they're reminders for me. And if I don't talk about it, please, help me remember. Who knows what belief bias is?
Well, I don't know if I can define it, but I'm probably showing it because the first thing in my brain is, well, no, because that's just silly.
Right.
Because there's something in my brain that, even beyond my faith, it's like the whole polytheism thing. It just seems like the monotheistic thing is just it's like, that's kid stuff. And somewhere along the way, humans got smarter, and now they believe, like I believe. I don't know, but when I first think of that, it's just like, yeah, that's like comic book stuff.
So belief bias is the idea that you don't listen to the argument, but you listen to what you believe, right? It's what's, and you ask yourself, is it plausible or is it childish, right? And even if you're presented with evidence, you won't listen to the evidence if you have belief bias, because it's just not plausible to you. It's what you believe. So I got a call from my daughter while I was preparing this class, and she'd just gotten out of her critical thinking class, and she said, "Did you know that people who study math are 6 times less likely to give in to belief bias than people who don't study math?" I thought that was interesting, but it begs the question, how many people study math? Want to wager a guess? Less than 4% in the United States. Less than 2% in the world. And we don't need to talk about why. I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, when you study math, and you're required by definition to accept what the data, the equations reveal. And sometimes they're not intuitive. And so you get into this, your brain responds to that kind of input. But it's a very small number of people within the population. So let me ask another question. Now we're Pharaoh. If an ancient Egyptian, say Pharaoh, were asked or presented with the idea of Jewish monotheism, how do you think they would react? The exact same way.
Maybe the logical thinker or whatever would say, okay, I need proof. Which is what I would have to say if someone said, hey, all this polytheism stuff, if I was playing along with you,
If I was even interested,
I'd say, okay, let's just prove it.
show me. Right.
Everything. But yeah, the first thought is always, yeah, that's silly. But yeah, I'd say, I guess that's what those lights were. I mean, you're not gonna, yeah. That's the one thing I'm thinking out loud here. It's like I wouldn't expect Pharaoh to say, "Oh yeah, sure, go right ahead."
Right.
Or anybody there.
We have 200 years of cultural belief bias in this country. There were 1,000 years with these kinds of structures all over the place, right? And these kinds of directives and sacrifices that were being made in Egypt. So let me make some observations. The Egyptian polytheistic ideas about Elohim completely clash with monotheism. It makes no sense, right? The Egyptian polytheistic rubric has been the culture for millennia, right? And there is this saying that I recently learned that I really like, that comes out of Australia. And it's, I guess if you're wealthy and privileged in Australia, you eat shrimp sandwiches. And the saying is, you can't slide in here like a shrimp sandwich and expect people to just defer to you. And I will use this about God. He can't just slide in here like a shrimp sandwich and expect Pharaoh to get in line. Right? That's just an observation. I'm just saying. Yes? Go ahead.
Thinking of it from Pharaoh's perspective.
Uh-huh.
Thinking of it from the perspective of the everyday citizen. Because of the nature of human mind, as much as they might be under the pressure of Pharaoh to live according
the evidence of Pharaoh's inability to really control those powers, which we know are the powers of God, of nature, they have to be seen that it's really not working. And being under the idea of, yeah, I'm supposed to believe this, but this is telling me this is not working, would say to me, if I asked one of those Egyptians 1,000 years ago, or 5,000 years ago, that they've lived in that way for 1,000 years, and I told them, no, you know what? There's one God. He is all powerful. I would say that's a wonderful news. I mean, you just simplified my life.
So,
and of course, I'm saying that as a 21st century Christian
well,
who's lived the way that I've lived.
I want to believe that too. I want to believe that if I were living under the Egyptian polytheistic rubric, that if somebody came and told me there's a, let me give you an example. I'm just making it up, standing on one foot. Okay? What if somebody came and said, really, the reason for all the injustice in the world today, injustice, so much injustice, right? The haves, the have-nots continue to grow. There's not an equal distribution of resources. There's not a common respect for humanity. There's so much injustice. You all think you have justice here in the United States, but look at all the injustice. It's because, in fact, the world as we know it is governed on the divine level by multiple gods. And you have chosen only one. And as a consequence, those other gods, they're angry. And so as much as you strive for justice, it's not happening. And isn't it good news to know that there is many gods out there and that you should be offering your lives and sacrifice and service to them?
Which one?
Well, I didn't work out the details. I'm standing on one foot. But do you see what I'm saying? They've had 1,000 years. And this civilization is extraordinary. It's like nothing that has ever existed. So, yeah, it may not be perfect, but I'm not sure that I hear what you're saying, and I hope that I would respond in the same way, but I'm not sure that most people would.
Their government, their civilization is also set up in blame game. Because Pharaoh is there to protect the people against the chaos. So you said at the very beginning of the lesson today,
Right.
was if something was going wrong, it was because there was chaos in the heavens between a couple of gods. That was coming down, and I'm going to build a temple or do something to appease the gods to protect you.
That's
Therefore,
it.
I'm your protector.
Right. That's a really interesting. I mean, it does inherently build in this rationale for why it's not working, but at the same time upholds it stands the test, right? Where are we? Where are we? Are we here? So God made humanity. He knows how we work. He knows that we work with belief bias, right? And I stand by my statement. If he's just going to slide in like the shrimp sandwich, right, and expect Pharaoh to get in line, I would define that as being a bully. Well, you're just going to come in here and force him to reject 1,000 years of the way it's been? and you're just going to put your foot down. Now, that's a bully to me. And if we have, I can't help it. It's a bit of a cognitive dissonance for me, right? If I see this story as God coming in and just deciding, this is the way it is, I'm telling you, and if you don't get in line, I'm going to wipe you out. And I'm going to start with your crops, I'll start with the Nile, then I'll move on to making you miserable in life, then I'll move on to your animals, and eventually, if you don't get in line, I'm going to kill all your kids. Because I am number one. Now, that is not part of my conscious thinking. It's just not part of my conscious thinking. That's not the God I worship. And I believe Jesus told a story that if you see God that way, you're going to end up like the one-talent servant. I knew that you behave this way. You are not to be questioned. You are not to be messed with. And you will use your almighty power to destroy me. So I put your coin, I buried it. Right? I fear I've been guilty of that. Because somewhere in the back of my head, I'm thinking, I can't question God. I can't, he will do what he will do, and he doesn't owe me an explanation. And there is an element of that that's absolutely true. And when my children were small, I worked really hard not to pull the parent card, not to pull the I told you so, because I'm your father. That's why you will do it. But I'm not sure that that's always the best solution. You see, the implications of monotheism they just are inconceivable to anyone who is working under this rubric. And God knew that. He really did. He knows us, right? God knew that. And maybe that's why Moses made a second appeal to Pharaoh in chapter 5. Do you remember when we were playing the Exodus game? And we found it so strange that at first, Moses came in and said, Jehovah has said, let my people go so that they can celebrate with me in the desert. And Pharaoh said, no. I checked my records and I don't have a Jehovah on the list. And so no, I don't know Jehovah, and no, I'm not letting him go, your people go. And Pharaoh and Moses did this weird thing. He completely changed it. We happened upon a God, a power in the desert, and we need to go for 3 days into the wilderness to make sacrifices so that this power does not punish us. I believe Moses, God, understands that Pharaoh wasn't going to just get in line. And he was trying to meet Pharaoh where Pharaoh was in this situation. He was trying to use vocabulary that Pharaoh would understand. So let's go back to monotheism for a second. Can I just stop and ask for comments? Anybody want to say anything? We just answered a very big question that we asked while we were playing the Exodus game. And I think the way I actually interrupted that class and said, did Moses really think this was going to work? I, for years, thought exactly the way Mark did about this narrative. It looks like Moses has gone off script. He's just decided, I'm going to do a Hail Mary. I'm going to talk to Pharaoh, and I'll just change the whole ask. Maybe just 3 days. We'll go take a vacation. Just give us that. We'll try and inch our way over there. I'm not sure. I think he was on script. And no disrespect, because I totally get where you're coming from. But I think he was trying, as God does, with patience, to bring Pharaoh. There's an education process that begins in chapter 5. And I think that if Pharaoh would have said, okay, the story would have been very different. But I think as we go on, we'll find out that God had a plan. And there are reasons why God might call his people into the wilderness to sacrifice and to celebrate. What might those reasons be? And just as a hint to this question, and I do want to talk about it, there are 7 sacrifices in the Levitical sacrificial system. So if you, there are reasons to sacrifice under the rubric of monotheism. What might they be? Oh, just give me one. Come on.
Offerings,
What, guilt offerings, an apology.
sin offering, friendship offering,
Okay, these are the 7 that we're talking about in the Levitical system. There are reasons, when Mother's Day is a big. It turns out to be a huge holiday in this country, right? I can't remember, more flowers sold, more travel done, more phone calls made, more lunches out. Because why are kids buying flowers for their mother? Why are they taking their mother out for a meal? Why are they going? It's not because the mother can't afford the flowers, is it? Out of respect. And I go back to that analogy where the kids don't realize the parents. Any other reasons? Gratitude, which is kind of the same thing. Sin, an apology for having done something wrong. Anything else? Fellowship offering, just because of friendship. So those are the ones I came up with. Gratitude, right? If there's, under monotheism, there's a single creator, and I owe my very existence to that creator. There's a reason to give a gift to that creator. Missing the mark. There's a reason to say I'm sorry through sacrifice. And then finally, just because there's a relationship and there's respect. We're going to switch gears here for a second in the last 7 minutes of our class. There was one question that came up all 3 rounds of the Exodus game, remember? It looks like, from God's perspective, he's not trying to get the Hebrews out of Egypt as fast as he can. Because what? He has another agenda. When we were playing Pharaoh, and I wasn't here, and Pharaoh was saying, how about getting rid of those frogs tomorrow? How about let's see how much the Hebrews lost? He seemed to have
Another agenda.
Thank you. And when we played Moses, and Moses said, he changed his speeches, and we said, that's weird. It's probably because Moses had, I would posit that the other agenda was monotheism, right?
So do you think Pharaoh was then saying, like, kind of like, show me the data? Like, I want to, like, he's evaluating the data and trying to figure out if it's real?
As we go on, I think that you're going to find that's exactly what was happening. See, monotheism introduces some concepts. It changes spirituality and introduces concepts that never existed before. it introduces this idea of spiritual gratitude. I mean, these people could be, under polytheism, you can be grateful that your crops weren't wiped out. But it's not because of something that the God did just for you. It's because of your appeasement. It's because of your worship. It was a quid pro quo. So there's an element of gratitude within monotheism that doesn't involve that kind of exchange. It's not transactional anymore. Just like it's not transactional for a child to give a gift to their mother on Mother's Day because the mother doesn't need it. It's because there's respect and love. And morality gets introduced through monotheism. Because if there's one creator, then that creator gets to set the rules. Right? There's a right and a wrong. And that didn't exist under polytheism. It doesn't exist under polytheism. Anything goes under polytheism. Right? But if there's somebody who makes the, if I'm playing Monopoly and I decide that when I pass go, I get $400. Too bad for you guys. You can't do that, right? Because Parker Brothers decided you get 200 Monopoly dollars when you pass go. And you can get together, and I just take this analogy one step further, with a group of your friends, and you can decide that when we pass go, we get $400. But it's really not the way it works. And if you're going to enter the tournament, you only get 200. And there are people who have gotten together and decided they're going to change the rules of morality. Right? But it doesn't really work that way. Under monotheism, only one sets the rules. And finally, there is this concept of love. Love comes out of monotheism. It is a concept that is inherent in the Shema, which is the Jewish, it came out of the Exodus story, right? It's one of those passages that is in the little tefillin. Hear, O Israel, Jehovah is your God. Jehovah is one. And the natural response, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. The two are inextricable if there's only one. And so it becomes clear why Jehovah wants his name to be known, right? This is a game changer. Now, remind me, who was it that God was wanting his name to be known to? Do you remember? I've got a new name. Jehovah is my name. I am the one and only, the true God and creator of all. Exodus 7, verse 5. The Egyptians will know. The Egyptians weren't just discarded by God in this story. He is making himself known to the Hebrews, to Moses, and to the Egyptians. Because they're part of his creation too, right? The other agenda. God reveals his identity in the context of this other agenda as the creator, as the heavenly parent. We come back to that analogy that I made before. And his identity is the parent of all humanity. This is a story about the love of a parent, both the parent of Jacob or Israel and the parent of Egypt or the Pharaoh. And if this Elohim is in fact the creator of all, there is an inherent relationship between the creator and the creation, And guess what? We have the answer to our assignment. This is the qualitative difference between monotheism and polytheism. It's not the numbers. It's a real game changer. But it begs one question to me. And it's your assignment for next week. Now, I gave you 2 questions, but the real question is, why now? Why in the world did God decide to make his identity and the concept of monotheism, why did he bring it into human consciousness at this point? Why at this point? Thousands of years have gone by already. Why now? And then also, I want to go back to this idea. I accused God of being a bully, potentially. And I think that it's not so unrealistic that somewhere in the back of people's minds, whether it's conscious or unconscious, they have seen stories like the Exodus story, and they perceive God to be a bully. And I would ask you this week to consider historical examples where people have demonstrated that they believe that God is a bully. And I don't think that we have to look too far for these examples, and I don't think there are just a few of them. So I want to hear what you guys have to say about that. And I will leave you with this. One of the things I said during the introduction to this class, when Sarah was asking me, what are you getting out of studying the Exodus? I said, it's very subtle, but it can change the way you think about God and think about who he is. And I think that this concept of him being a bully, and, he's going to slide in and he's going to expect you to get in line, and if you don't, he's going to use his almighty power to hurt you. I don't think that anymore. But we'll talk some more about that in part 2 of monotheism at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning next week. We'll answer that question. Why now?